Okay. So, so what I like to do with the review, and we just have a little over an hour, is I may not get through the whole thing, and we're going through, I think, Plato's forms. Isn't that what I put on the? There is not a space on the review sheet for Plato's forms, so you got to go to the PowerPoint to look at that. You know, and again, if you don't want to print out a whole PowerPoint or something, remember you can get the information in just a couple of pages, 2 or 3 pages, by printing out the PowerPoint and outline view. It's one of the print options, you know. And if you printed an outline view, all it does is print out the text, you know. And a PowerPoint that might be 17 pages, if it's a real long one, if you printed it out in 3-slide mode, might be 2 or 3 pages, if, you know. So, okay, well, you know, we're testing on like the bigger concepts. Some of the subtleties of the movements of the arguments are stuff that you can put in your essay, but it's not what I'm gonna ask you questions on. Okay. What?
Can we have a note, like a flashcard of notes?
Well, no. I mean, the in-class portion is not open book. Okay. The home portion, you know, the essay is.
Is it multiple choice on the test?
It's going to be a combination of multiple choice and true and false. I thought I said that at the first day of the course when we went over the syllabus. It's not going to be long. It's going to be like 25 questions, you know, for 2 points apiece, and then your essay is worth 50 points, you know, and that's the 100 points of the test. Yeah, if we have time, I can show you maybe some some examples, but I don't know if the sample questions that I have from previous semester is going to work. But yeah, you know, if somebody's asking a question. Look, I mean, I don't. Sometimes I put sample questions here. I don't see one here. So, okay, wait a second. Let me turn off this. This is, and I can make this viewable to you. I mean, there's nothing secret about this. This was, sometimes for the first test, I'll do some sample questions, you know, times when I haven't had half classes snowed out, you know, I have you print out of this, but, well, you know, this will give you an idea of how I'm looking for big concepts. right? Western philosophy is said to be done with the views of what? Well, I mean, how many would say A or B? How about C? How about D? Well, it's obviously not D, but I mean, we said Thales is the first Western philosopher. So for Anaximander, the Pyrrhon of primordial stuff was just like, was it like earth? Was it like air? Was it like fire? Or, okay, I'm going to say A. It's C. Okay, about D. And then take it to D. Well, remember, he said it couldn't be any one of the main elements, or else it would take over, and also they're paired as opposites, so he didn't think they could change into one another. So it had to be something more basic than any of these. So the answer to D, to 2 would be D, none of the above. Now you can write down the answers to these. I'll make these visible to you. There's nothing. So Heraclitus referred to ultimate reality as A, fleeting and changeable, B, like the fluctuating flow of a river, C, an everlasting fire, or D, all of the above. What would be the option there? Yeah, I mean, somebody said D, right? I mean, all 3 of these are ways that he referred to things. So, so if you know it's A, I mean, so some of them may have an all the above or none of the above option. Not every question has that. But if you know that it's A, you want to look at the other, distractor, the other options to see whether it might be all the above. And if you know it's 2 of them, and you're not sure about the third, but there's an all the above, well, it's probably all the above. All of these have only one right answer. They're not multiple choice. So, I mean, let's say you can write down the right answer to this, and I'll make it visible on Blackboard after class. So there was all the above. Parmenides bases views concerning the ultimate nature of being or existence on arguments derived from careful sense observations of the world. Well, did he? I mean, experiments made in his own laboratory. Was he testing his theories, or a priori arguments, that is, arguments not based on sense experience? All the above. Well, it's not really going to be all the above, since these are opposites, but I'm going to say A. Okay. B. C. D. Well, nobody wants to commit themselves, but no, I mean, remember, Parmenides may have been the first Western philosopher, at least that we know of, to use an a priori argument. I mean, his abstract argument is designed to show, just by reasoning alone, that being doesn't come into existence or go out of existence, but it doesn't change in that respect. So here, the correct answer to 4 would be C. For 5, you can't step twice in the same river, was said by. Well, now here, I mean, this is not a good pedagogical practice, since, the answer is hinted at above. But Empedocles, Heraclitus, Thales, or Anaximenes. Who's the no, I mean, for a lot of these questions, we're focusing on the big main concepts. For Parmenides and the fact that nothing can come into or go out of existence shows that there can be no tooth fairy. Water change or forms in particular things. Yeah. Here again, it's sea or change. Right. I mean, that's the essentials of his argument against change. And now, we didn't go through the apology, but this was mentioned several times, right? In the apology, Socrates argues that the unexamined life is not worth living. Wisdom through philosophy is to be sought only after one finds wealth. Inner goodness is impossible since all people are selfish. Or confidence in our own wisdom, knowing that we know, is the true goal of philosophy. Which one of these? Yeah, it's A. There. Now, we didn't really go on the apology. It was mentioned in your text and in the videos. So there's not going to be much on that. 8 and 9 are examples of a true or false question. And there, you know how to do on Scantron. A is true, B is false. Anaximander did not think that the ultimate stuff was either earth, air, fire, or water. So, there was a multiple choice question that covered much the same ground. So that would be what?
True.
Yeah, that would be true, right? He didn't think that it was, but it was something more basic, the apeiron, right? 9, if we accept the arguments of Parmenides, change would be mere illusion, true or false? See, that would be true, right? If there isn't any real change, then anything we think we perceive as change is wrong, it's an illusion. The one I had from my other class didn't quite cover what they covered. And I didn't look at this for you all. But I'll make this visible. Sometimes I have a sheet of sample questions that from a previous semester where we covered things in different order, and the sample questions don't quite match up. This one, I think I've got a separate menu item on it. I think on this one I put a separate menu item. Yeah, see, it says sample questions. Hold it, wait a second. Okay, it took the command. Here's your view, and so now it's there. So if you clicked on it, oh, hold it. All right, let me go back. There are 2 different places you have to make it visible. So let me do this. is a little more complicated, but. So if you clicked on it, it would open it, right? And there it is. Okay, so that is visible then. So I don't do a thing of sample questions with every test, because after you've taken the first test, you know how I would ask an objective question on a philosophy test. But the purpose of doing it for the first test is to give you some idea of, how I would do that. Now, all of these are covering the pre-Socratics, but obviously the test itself covers more than that. But so anyway, that is. So anyway, so to answer some questions in the review sheet, just to kind of go through, and feel free to raise your hand, but I'll remind you that there is a recorded review session covering much the same thing. Now, the only thing in the recorded review session at the very end, there's a little bit on Plato's three-part soul. We didn't get to that, so that's not going to be on your test. And also, again, I'll remind you, just because there's no section on the review sheet for the PowerPoint on Plato's forms, doesn't mean it won't be on the test. It will, Well, okay. For the pre-Socratics, sometimes this is called the Milesian school. We looked at Thales, and we saw that Aristotle, why did he say Aristotle? Why did Aristotle say Thales chose water as the primordial stuff? What did he focus on? Yeah, pretty much. And so you can see how that could be, something I'd possibly ask a question on. Yeah, it's necessity for life. What I also mentioned is some other things that are usually brought out about the fact that here you've got a substance that very obviously takes on observable different forms, solid, liquid, and gas, and it's not as much of a stretch to think, well, maybe there are other less obvious forms of water like wood and stone. So now, what Thales might have meant by all things are full of gods, again, what's emphasized in the PowerPoint and the view that this other text took was that he may have tried to express something that he didn't really have the language to express, and that is that there's a causal principle inherent in things that is the reason and that is the place where we can get an explanation for why things happen in nature. You know, so it's like the gods are in something rather than the gods being external agents that interfere, like Zeus would make the rain. You know, and so the idea is that by saying all things are full of gods, he was really hinting toward a naturalistic explanation of things, looking for causal principles in things. Now, I said the way I used to read it is the adoption of a primitive animism, that he doesn't get totally away from the mythological frame of mind, and that he's saying that there are spirits in things. You know, we don't know enough about what he said, and not enough has survived. Remember, of these earliest philosophers, a lot of what has survived is just fragments, or what somebody like Aristotle said about them. Yeah.
On a blog, they were saying that it could also mean that everything is more complicated than what it seems. Would that be okay to say on the test?
Well, there aren't going to be any fill-in the blanks questions. I mean, that, you know. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, it's a very general statement, but
Right.
yeah. But if you're saying that things are more complicated and that there are causal principles within things
Right.
that furnish the explanation for why they do what they do in nature, you know. Yeah, I mean, that's not bad. Okay, the philosophical problem that most of these ancient philosophers were dealing with was what we call the problem of the one and the many. Is reality ultimately only one kind of thing? Or is it irreducibly many kinds of things? Note, the four-element theory says that reality, ultimate reality, is irreducibly four kinds of things. That is, you can't get more basic than that. But notice these pre-Socratic philosophers are trying to get more basic than that. You know, Thales saying everything's ultimately water, that you know, Anaximander looking for a basic level of existence, you know, that's more basic than any of the four elements. Anaximenes, who we didn't really cover, but he's mentioned in your book, who said everything's air, and basically he brought in to play the forces of condensation and rarefaction. In other words, things like fire and the soul are very rarefied air, and other things like water and earth and even stone for Anaximenes were much more condensed forms of air. So, anyway, well, to move on, Anaximander then, there's quite a bit of space taken up in the PowerPoint on him. Well, why he needs something more basic than the received four elements for his primordial stuff? Well, one is his claim that if it were any of the other four, then that element would take over. In other words, if Thales were right and if everything were water, then everything would be obviously water. So he's saying if the basic stuff were any of these four elements, earth, air, fire, or water, then that element would take over everything else. But also, there's a problem of things changing into other things. You have these elements are paired as opposites, and he didn't see how a thing is going to change into its opposite. The opposite elements tend to cancel each other out rather than have one turn into the other. So, those are the two biggest reasons given. And again, those are portrayed in detail in the PowerPoints. So the features of the boundless are it's beyond our senses. It's kind of a homogeneous mass. Russell says it's more like a primordial sea of existence or sea of being out of which everything comes. But things within the primordial stuff, which for him is the apeiron, are undistinguished, and so the words indefinite, boundless, indeterminate are used to describe this primordial stuff, and it's something more basic than what our senses put us in touch with. Now, as I said, one of the things Richard Rorty, the 20th century philosopher, said when I was at Virginia is when you hear a philosopher make a claim like, and he didn't use the apeiron, but he used a similar example, where a philosopher is using a word that might be a word that they made up, and they say, well, this gives us a deep insight into reality. Like we say, everything's the apeiron. Well, and it's beyond the reach of our senses. One way of taking that is that it gives us a concept that may be so deep a description of ultimate reality that it's beyond the realm of our puny senses. That is, that the concept is very deep. Or another way of looking at it is that the concept may be empty, may have no clear meaning, that maybe the person who's using it doesn't even know what they mean. And Hume goes down this road in criticizing a lot of basic concepts philosophers use. And so Anaximenes gave this as one reason why he rejected the apeiron. It's just too mysterious a thing. And he went back to portraying ultimate reality as one of the basic four elements, but with a story of how they can change into one another. And so Anaximenes brought in the forces of condensation and rarefaction. Now, features of the world for Anaximander, which separates out the elements from the chaos of the boundless. Now, your book takes some delight in saying, well, maybe this was, if I can recall, maybe this was an example of an early Big Bang. And what separated out the elements was some sort of a cataclysmic event. That's the way your book approaches it. You will see a different expert's view on how he thought the elements that we do see are separated out of the indefinite apeiron, and that is by a sort of vortex motion of the whole universe, that they're separated out much in the same way that a centrifuge separates out elements. And so here the vortex motion is the motion of the entire universe. You know, remember that they have, you know, for them the Earth is the center of the universe, and the most dense thing. So you've got Earth, and then you've got water as the next layer, you know, water which lies on Earth, and then you've got air, and then you have an outer layer of fire. So the idea is the constant circular motion of the universe separates out from the apeiron the four elements, and also gives them a sort of place in the universe. And so there's supposed to be a fiery outer layer at the edge of the universe where even the gods live. But we don't see that because there's a covering over it, but the covering has holes in it, and we see the stars, what they really are is some of the light from the fiery outer layer showing through. Yeah.
So then how did they explain the difference between like day and night?
That's, I don't know. It's yeah. Well, I think for them, I mean, the Earth is stationary, and it's the sun that's, moving.
So then would there have been a sun, or was the sun just like the giant hole that showed more than the star hole?
That's a good question. If what we see as stars are, just holes in the fiery outer layer, is the sun a big hole? I mean, it would seem that would be the way he looked at it, because I've never, I haven't read anything that gives any different account of what he thought. And remember, for some of these earliest ones, we don't have a lot that's come down that survived. Had the library not been burned down at Alexandria, perhaps some of these works would have survived, but that's not the case. So we have, fragments of what they said, and also Anaximander, wasn't the clearest writer. Well, Heraclitus and Parmenides are important. I mean, there are other pre-Socratics, but I think Heraclitus and Parmenides are important to study to kind of understand Plato, because Plato's theory is really an attempt to reconcile two apparently opposite views. And of course, Plato's view is that Heraclitus and Parmenides were both partly right and partly wrong, right? Heraclitus got it right about this world. It is a world in constant change. Change is not an illusion, as Parmenides thought. But where Heraclitus went wrong is in thinking that all of reality is in a state of becoming. It's not stable. Well, and of course that's Plato's view of things in this world. You know, things inside the cave. They're in a state of becoming something else. They aren't fully real. To be fully real, you need to be stable and just what you are and eternal. And these are characteristics of the forms. So, you know, we can't, what do you mean? Well, you know, we can't step in the same waters twice because they're constantly moving. I think your book throws the other wrinkle in there that we're constantly changing as well. You know, so you can't step in the same waters twice, but he did understand that there's a sensible way that we understand what we mean by the same river, and you know, his view is that things in this world are get their identity by a play of opposites. That we can speak of the same river, or we can speak of, you know, the Gunpowder River or the Potomac River. And the idea is you've got the constant tension of opposite forces, water that naturally wants to overflow its banks, and the banks of the river that are containing it. And it's that tension that he refers to. In other words, to understand that things in this universe get their identity by a play and a tension between opposites is to understand the deepest part of what there is to learn about the nature of reality. And for Heraclitus, that's to understand what he calls the logos, the unifying principle that underlies change. And we saw that for him, he thought, you know, give some examples that illustrate the principle of oneness and difference. And there are several in the PowerPoint. Some of these are his own examples, that water can be both good and bad at the same time, good for fish, bad for us, at least in terms of living in it. A road can have the two opposite qualities of going up and going down. The same pen can write both a straight or a crooked line, two opposite lines. You know, so the Greek term he used then for this principle of oneness is the word logos. Now, so it's Heraclitus that really uses the word logos in a big way in his philosophy. Now, your book throws an extra wrinkle, and it's not wrong in doing so, because we have ologies, the word ology, like epistemology, the theory or the study of knowledge, episteme being knowledge, comes from this word logia or logos, same root word. So your book goes farther and says, well, this idea that there are rational explanations for things, and that we need to understand them, in contrast to, say, the mythological view of things, is the contrast for them between logia, the word logos there, and mythos, you know. So the rational approach to philosophy, you know, and we saw that. I mean, Parmenides says that his book was inspired by a god, and that's not a very philosophical statement. Take this on the authority of a god who inspired it. But when he goes on to say, but assess, understand, and assess for yourself the arguments that I present. Well, that's, going toward logia, and getting away from mythos. So, well, anyway, to go back, so those were some of the simple examples. So again, even though your book wants to apply logos or logia to, the whole philosophic approach, remember that it's Heraclitus in particular that used the word logos, which is translated word, but your books also say you can extend that, to its meaning a rational account in words of how things were, that does not bring in the gods. So the word is a literal translation of logos. So it's Heraclitus in particular that really uses that term. So the significance of and place of strife of the world order. Well, here, the idea is that if to understand the deep underlying unifying principle that makes things what they are is to understand the logos, it's also to understand that things get their identity. A river gets its identity as a river. A lyre, a tune on a lyre comes to exist because of the play of opposite forces, right? You tune a string, you've got tension between the tuning peg and the bridge, that pulls the string tight, and you don't get a tone on a lyre unless you, pull the string. So for him, the whole underlying world order depends on this strife or constant tension of things unified in the logos, and that, remember, he chides Achilles for wanting all strife and tension to go away, saying that that's a way of ending the whole world order. Any questions about the pre-Socratic? I mean, again, I see people have been taking notes, and that's really good. Well, I put a lot of the meanings of these things. Did you have a question? Oh, but do I mention autonomy somewhere? I think that was from. Oh yeah, actually, well, yeah. Sometimes we tell people that we want you to be autonomous. Basically, when we look at Kant later on, if we have time, the word autonomy literally means a law unto yourself, but we've broadened that to mean basically making your own decisions. And if we say we want you to be autonomous in this class, what we said is, look, we're going to present several different slants, several different perspectives on just about every view we take, and we're not going to tell you what to believe. We're going to say, well, okay, exercise your own autonomy and choose for yourself who you think has the best, perspective on something, and so that's. So the word autonomy is basically making your own decisions about what things to accept. And this is part of the philosophical journey that's illustrated by the cave, that, that there's a sense in which principles that you just pick up from your environment are beliefs you might have, but there's a sense in which they really become your own views when you think through them and you think, well, you know what, I was always taught this, but now that I really think things over and look at the reasons for and against, I really do think that this is the best way to believe on this or that particular issue, whether it be in politics or religion or some philosophical issue, So when we say we want you to be autonomous, we want you to decide for yourself about things. So the prisoner situation, obviously, they are prisoners, have been there all their lives. It's an uncomfortable situation since they are seated. Your book has them seated on a chair. I always picture them seated right on the ground. But it doesn't matter. Their head and their necks are chained. And the important thing to point out here is that their head and their necks are chained such that they can only see what's in front of them. And that's what they've been acquainted with all their lives, which is basically the panoply of shadows on the back wall of the cave, because they've got a raiseway behind them and a fire behind people who are walking, carrying various things. So their vision then is limited, to the shadows on the back of the cave. And so for the prisoners, that is reality, since that's all they've known, right? Prisoners' theory of reality. And obviously the prisoners are meant to be like us in several ways. We mentioned that there are two broad ways of taking this, and I'd refer you to some of the notes I put on the board. One is to try to bring this story into 2015 and say, well, we're like the prisoners because we too have grown up in a particular intellectual environment. We're bombarded with various views all of our lives, from the media, from our place of worship, if we have one, from our family, from our friends, from the internet, and there are a lot of beliefs that we've uncritically accepted just because we've been immersed in a particular cultural environment. But what philosophy is trying to do, and this is what Socrates did to the poets and the politicians that he confronted in Athens, this is what was going on when Socrates was interacting with Thrasymachus on the point of view of justice, or when Socrates was confronting people about their views on virtue. In other words, they may have views that they've accepted, but what philosophy tries to get us to do is to examine in a critical way that's not always negative, but is reflective, where you're looking at the reasons why you hold the beliefs that you have. And that's as relevant for us today as it was for them back there. Now, as I said, where it breaks down, where this contemporary interpretation breaks down is, we find that the prisoners' belief about ultimate reality was absolutely wrong. Right? They really should abandon all of their views that the shadows were the most real things. Whereas when we sift through and examine our culturally acquired unreflective beliefs, we may go both ways. I used to ask people at the end of an ethics course, was there any view that you changed because of something you encountered in the course readings that you had when you came into this class? And we did a lot of hot button issues, right? Abortion, euthanasia, suicide, stuff like that. But I also asked them, well, was there some belief that you carried into this course that was strengthened for you by some argument that a philosopher presented? You know, and so in the real world, when you actually examine philosophically your own beliefs, you know, yeah, you may find reason to call into question something you believed all your life in one area, but you may find arguments in support of something you've already believed from these philosophers who've tried to think things through deeply that support a view you've had. In other words, you may think, well, you know what, I've got some support for this belief that I had some arguments to back it up that I never knew were there. You know, so it can go both ways. So then one way, makes the cave to be our sort of intellectual, cultural environment. You know, we're the prisoners. The shadows are uncritically acquired beliefs, the ones we haven't challenged, we've just soaked up, right? And so I guess the fire and the sun would be, it's hard to do the contemporary interpretation and make everything mean something. But the objects casting the shadows, I guess, would be more true beliefs. When you examine your beliefs, obviously, the idea of turning around is turning around and looking at your worldview, your beliefs, and then critically examining it. And so that's what happened to the released prisoner. He's the philosophy student. Specifically, the person who leads him out, Plato means us to be Socrates. It can be anyone who challenges somebody philosophically. And I guess the world outside the cave would be the beliefs that survive critical scrutiny for you. In other words, the beliefs that you've acquired all your life that now you've looked at them more closely philosophically, and you say, well, okay, yeah, I'm going to hold on to this belief. I even have better reasons. Or I'm going to reject, Well, we saw for Plato, the cave represents what? What he calls the sensible world. Everything in the cave relates to this world. The prisoners are us. The shadows are your book likes to go into this, but images of reality. You can't use the kind of illustrations you could use when I was growing up, right? Back in the old days when some of us used cassette tapes, you knew that if you copied a cassette, your analog copy was not going to be as good as the original. It was going to be noisier, not as good a recording. And if you went and took that and made a copy of a copy, it would deteriorate even further. So the farther away you got from the original, the worse of a copy you got in the old analog days, and this applied to doing a tape from an analog phonograph record or copying a tape from a tape. You know, you guys, we can't use that analogy with you because all you know are digital copies, and ones and zeros are ones and zeros, right? If I go and burn a copy of a CD, it's going to be indistinguishable in quality from the original. But that wasn't the case with analog copies. You know, an analog copy of an album on a cassette tape wouldn't be as good. And this is kind of Plato's view, that when we're starting to look at copies, at images of reality, we're getting farther away from reality. So the shadows represent any kind of images of things, whether it be shadows, reflections in a mirror, reflections in water. Those are the farthest removed from reality. So for Plato, the visual arts are very far removed from reality. They had a low place in his ideal state. We haven't gotten to Plato's state because of the weatherman. You know, but so shadows that the prisoners thought are reality, the most real thing, turned out for Plato to be on the bottom rung of the ladder. So the prisoner comes to see that real things like the desks that make the shadows, or the statue that somebody's carrying that makes the shadow of the statue. Ultimately, at first he doesn't want to buy the claim that what he's now being shown is more real than the shadows, but eventually he comes around on his journey. And so for Plato, you've got degrees of existence or reality where you know, the physical desk is more real than a reflection of it or a painting of the desk. Or its shadow, you know, so the objects cast in the shadow represent basically material objects in this world. But here again, we, like the prisoners, as I said, have been in this world all of our lives. And so just like the prisoners think the shadows are real, we tend to think, well, okay, the physical desk is the most real thing. But of course, Plato's trying to get us to see that ultimate reality is beyond this world, in the world outside the cave, and that the physical desk is just an imperfect copy of the form of a desk or deskins. Every physical thing is a combination for Plato of form and matter. But it's matter that makes these desks imperfect. You know, and so the physical desk that we think is the most real for Plato is less real than the eternal form of a desk. The physical triangle I draw is less real than the eternal form of a triangle. So if you can get that, the fact that Plato is trying to turn your view of the world upside down. And Plato knows that people in Athens have the same view that people have nowadays, right? You know, they don't think that there is an eternal form of a desk that has more reality than the particular desk. They think the particular desk is the most real. People are hung up on things in this world. Plato says a philosopher should be about looking for things in the world of the forms, where there are these perfect blueprints of things in this world. You know, and so the world outside the cave is the world of the forms. And so, well, at any rate, you know, you can go back and look at your notes on this. You know, Again, I think all we're going to do is the task. Some people will be finished in 20 or 25 minutes. Some people will take 40, So it's no use bringing people back for 20 minutes. In a 3-hour night class, I do bring people back after a test. So we'll do the test at the beginning. I'll let you make marks on the question sheet and cross out options. Anyway. Okay, thank you for coming. If anyone missed the roll, sign it on the way out. And if you have a question that comes up, again, the best email to use, you can send it to both, but make sure you CC a copy to my Gmail, because that rings on my phone, and I can try to get you a quick answer. All right, we'll see you, and sorry for being late.